Hey everybody, Frank Finance here. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Today I want to talk about two brand new risks to Alibaba. The first being the US government researching and trying to figure out if Alibaba's cloud presents a national security risk. The second risk to Alibaba that's relatively new is what is going to happen with Alibaba if they potentially help Russia in the Ukraine-Russian conflict or potentially invade Taiwan, which has also been hinted at. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching. Hit that like button. Now back to your content. Now the first risk is that Alibaba is under investigation, or a probe is underway around their Alibaba cloud to see if it poses a national security risk for the United States and the companies that are inside of the US. So essentially what I see out of this is there's only two possible outcomes that can really come out to this. First, that the US government basically says, oh, nothing to worry about here. But the problem with that is in the meantime, people are going to be very hesitant to issue new contracts and to do business with Alibaba Cloud in the meantime while we're waiting on the outcome of the probe. Another thing, the second outcome here is that Alibaba is basically found to be a security risk, and existing contracts with U.S. government, not U.S. government, but commercial U.S. companies, but commercially, are basically forbidden to work with Alibaba Cloud, and then that's going to prevent any new clients. The other downside to this is it's not just a U.S., it could be more than just the U.S., right? So if the U.S. government finds this to be a national security issue, you could see similar probes from other countries across the world. So that's just one thing here. So this is a big issue for Alibaba and a big risk from their growth perspective, as the cloud computing section is one of the largest growth drivers right now for Alibaba. So if this does play out and they do pose a national security risk, and the government, U.S. government says so, well, that's going to be a definitely loss from a potential market that they're going to lose out on completely, and it's going to really limit them solely, in my opinion, to China, and that's about it. The other problem I see with this is it almost seems kind of this for that, kind of tick for tat, in the fact that Chinese government has said the same thing about allowing U.S. companies and the U.S. government to see some things on the other side. So it almost seems like the U.S. government is saying, well, if we're a national security risk, then you're a national security risk. So I almost get that kind of vibe with this, which is not a good thing where governments are interfering, and it starts to trickle down into the company's relationships abroad. Pardon the interruption, but I just have to remind you, if you're not subscribed already, please do so now. Also hit that like button. Now back to your content. Risk number two is that the Chinese government, if they get involved with the Russian-Ukraine war, we could see some sanctions against China, which then could affect Alibaba. There's also a scenario where China does some sort of military action against Taiwan, and we could see a very similar scenario as we saw sanctions, broad sweeping sanctions against Russia. We could see something similar in that case with China as well. In both of those scenarios, it does not bode well for Alibaba. Yes, they have some resiliency, but having that economy totally cut off from the world is really going to reduce spending inside of China and will have a really large impact on Alibaba. And if that is the case, it is going to have a massive crater. Even from where their current prices are, I know people don't like to hear that, but even from where their current prices are, Alibaba will take a very, very large hit, and you will see them have a probably negative growth for the year if that does happen. What's the probability of that happening? 5-10%. I'm just throwing something on the wall here, but it is a real risk out there. It's not, and I did debate talking about this, but I really do think there is transparency I'd like to have some transparency in my thought and what I see as potential risk. It's good to be thinking about what could possibly happen and assign values against it so you can be realistic and understand what those scenarios would play out to. Now, is Alibaba worth zero in that scenario? I don't think so, but will they be worth significantly less? Yes, especially in the short term. And the other thing that really it draws into question is the long-term relationship between the US and China. and or really China and the world in that matter. And if that basically link is broken, it'll be probably decades before it comes back. I know that sounds very, very dramatic, but just think about all the relationships that have been broken inside of this Russian conflict with Ukraine and all its partners around the world. That is going to be decades long of rebuilding those relationships and rekindling that. And I know people probably are in disbelief of that ever starting to come back together, but it's very well possible that it does. But it's going to be a very long time for that to happen. And for most people, they're not really going to stick around for that to happen. So if this did happen to, China did decide to do something like that, and those sanctions did come across, you could see the SEC, you could see, actual lawmakers in the U.S. to basically say, nope, we're delisting all Chinese stocks. We're going to hurt them, financially. We're going to hurt them economically. Stop, put tons of sanctions on products. But also they have to realize that is also going to hurt consumers all across the world as well, because these supply chains are so interconnected these days that it's going to have further inflationary, pressures across the world. It's not just going to affect China. It will definitely start to spread, just as we've seen with Russia, which has limited, exports. Main one being oil, is still having a ripple effect against the global economy. And same thing with Ukraine. They do have exports themselves. I think wheat is one of the main ones, and so that has ripples as well. So I'm not sure exactly what Taiwan has to offer, but anything that it would be inside of those conflicts would start to affect those supply chains. So sanctioning with China would have, having similar sanctions in China would have a devastating impact for the world economy, especially in the short term. Now, to sum it all up, the first risk really affects one of the biggest growth drivers for Alibaba in their Alibaba Cloud. If that is affected from saying no more customers, you could see you're going to see a valuation hit on Alibaba, as growth will more than likely decrease for future years, because it is one of the biggest growth potential drivers for them. The second one is going to have a big value impact. Even from their where they're at in multi-year lows, you will see Alibaba continue to fall, because it will hurt them in the short run if China is basically cut off from the rest of the world. And that will be an unfortunate scenario if it does happen. Now, I mentioned 5 to 10% earlier. That does sound a little bit high at this point now that I talked through some of the global impact. I think the world will be a little more will be a little bit more picky on what they decide to sanction against China, as there are a lot more interdependencies there, and it's not just one export. Even though oil and gas is a big export there for the European countries, I will say that it doesn't seem 5 to 10% seems like pretty high, and doesn't seem very likely at this point. But we do have to be careful, and we do have to have a pulse on that. I mean, could it lead to a delisting faster? I think that's still a scenario that could play out if, that could be one of the first things they do, as it really has no impact on the economy and really just hurts investors in China. So it'll hurt Chinese investors, and it'll hurt U.S. investors, global investors really, in Chinese stocks. And outside of that, they'll say tough luck. Now, lastly, I will apologize for the doom and gloom, but I will not apologize for telling the truth, and that's why we call it Frank Finance. If you want to know more about Alibaba, as well as see a discounted free cash flow model, go ahead and click the link right here. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Frank Finance, out.